Welcome to the itdvds.com YouTube channel. This is just a sample of the training available at itdvds.com. If you would like to see complete training, please go to itdvds.com. Now let's begin the sample. When we took a look at the cluster diagram, we talked about the storage portion of our cluster and how this can almost be a single point of failure for your cluster. I mean, all your nodes can be up, but if you lose your storage, then your cluster is down. And this is why I want to warn you just a little bit about using less expensive hardware, especially when it comes to the storage portion. Because let's say we just take maybe an older server that has some direct attached storage to it, put some software on that server that turns it into an iSCSI SAN, and there's a lot of cheap or even free software out there that can take an older server and turn it into an iSCSI SAN, and then we have multiple nodes in our cluster. Well, what we've done in that case is most likely we've actually introduced more single points of failure than we would have had without a cluster. Even though we may have two nodes in that cluster, our storage portion is just a server and some direct attached storage, and if that fails, well, then our cluster is down. If both of our server nodes fail, then our cluster is down. If we have some sort of software issue with our cluster, then our cluster is down. So we've introduced more single points of failure and more complexity. Because sometimes we do run into problems when we fail over our cluster. In normal situations, we actually have to test failover. Normally we do this in like a maintenance window, but we can test it, and occasionally we do run into problems when we fail over, and when we do, the cluster's down. So now we've got more single points of failure than we would have if we had just one server that had our application on it. Let's say it's SQL Server. In that case, it would be the same as our storage portion, because in our storage portion, in an example I mentioned, we have a server with some direct attached storage. Well, we just have that as a single point of failure. We don't have all these other possibilities for points of failure. And also, sometimes when we use less expensive storage, we don't have the multipathing involved in our connections from our nodes to our storage. Things like our fiber channel HBAs, we normally have two of them going to two different fiber switches, so we've got redundancy in our paths, and then we have two connections going from our fiber switches, one from each switch going to our SAN. Or even with our iSCSI SAN, we can use multipathing I/O, which is similar. We'd have multiple Ethernet connections. But if we choose to use less expensive hardware, we might not have that multipathing. So again, more points of failure. If, let's say, the network card on our storage goes down, well, then the storage is down if we don't have multipathing. So just a warning that you don't want to introduce more points of failure and be under the illusion that because you have a cluster, you're better protected.